Maurice Hall had just finished mopping the Ivy League marble floors when a smug billionaire's son laughed and bet 10 grand. He couldn't solve a single math equation. 10 seconds later, the answer was on the board. Flawless. Maurice didn't speak. He just walked away. But what no one knew was that solving it would put his life in danger, because someone was already watching, ready to erase him again. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The morning sunlight poured through the enormous arched windows of Whitendale University's Welling Center for Global Finance, casting gold across the lacquered floors and revealing the physical manifestation of the country's wealth gap. The building itself looked less like a place of learning and more like a private museum curated for American royalty. Every inch of it radiated old money, polished mahogany, towering sculptures, glass cases filled with awards earned not by students but by the donors who funded them. Whitendale had a way of making the privileged feel destined for greatness, and everyone else feel like an intruder. Carson Welling thrived in that atmosphere. Tall, sharp-featured, and effortlessly arrogant, he moved through the halls as though the air parted for him. Professors greeted him by name, even when he didn't know theirs. Security nodded respectfully, ignoring whatever rule he broke that day. Students whispered about his father, Elliot Welling, hedge fund tycoon, university benefactor, and the kind of man who treated institutions like chess pieces. Carson didn't earn respect. He inherited it. That morning, while his classmates were dragging themselves to lectures, Carson and his friends occupied the elite-only study lounge, tucked behind a biometric lock. It was one of the perks only legacy students knew about, a room reserved for the sons and daughters of donors. Crystal chandeliers hung above velvet couches. A barista machine hissed steam while Carson reclined with his feet on a marble table, spinning a silver pen between his fingers. "All right, listen up," Carson said, tilting his head with the laid-back swagger of someone who never faced consequences. "I've got something better than a game." His friends Kyle, Trevor, and two others whose names changed each semester depending on who wanted to orbit Carson's world, leaned in as he opened his laptop. A dense equation filled the screen. Numbers, symbols, nested integrals, layers of variables folded into one another. It looked less like math and more like a wall meant to intimidate anyone staring too long. Trevor whistled under his breath. "Where'd you get that monster?" "My dad's team," Carson said casually. "It's some proprietary modeling thing his firm uses. I thought it'd be fun to see if any of you could break it." Kyle laughed. "Fun for who?" "For me," Carson replied. He stood up, tapping the screen. "All right, here's the bet. $10,000 cash. First person to solve this gets it. I'll even give you a 20-minute head start." The room filled with nervous laughter. Everyone knew Carson's money was real. He'd once thrown away a watch worth more than a semester's tuition because it got scratched. Trevor smirked. 10 grand? For this? I'm not burning my brain cells on some hedge fund puzzle. Scared? Carson teased. "No," Trevor said, rolling his eyes. "I just know my lane." Carson leaned back against the table, scanning the room with a predator's amusement. Then his gaze landed on someone he usually never acknowledged. Maurice Hall. Maurice pushed a cleaning cart near the back of the lounge. He moved quietly, focused, gloved hands lifting books off a table to wipe beneath them. His posture was straight, his movements controlled, as though he'd taught himself to take up as little space as possible. Maurice had worked the early shift for months, but to Carson he was just another background detail, another invisible worker maintaining the world he felt entitled to. And that invisibility made Carson bold. "Hey," Carson called out, loud enough to make the room fall silent. "What about you?" Maurice paused, one hand still on the edge of the table he was cleaning. He lifted his head slowly, expression calm, unreadable. Kyle snorted. "Dude." Carson gestured toward the laptop. $10,000 if you can solve this equation." Trevor muttered, "Come on, man. Don't do this." But Carson was already committed. He smirked, walking closer, lowering his voice just enough to make his words sound like a taunt dressed as friendliness. "It's simple math, right? You work around numbers all day." Maurice didn't respond. He just watched Carson with quiet patience, the kind that made Carson uncomfortable even if he didn't realize why. "I'm serious," Carson said louder, making sure everyone was watching. 10 grand if you solve this." The room buzzed. Phones came out. One student whispered, "This is gonna go viral." Maurice stepped forward slowly, wiping his hands on his uniform. "You really want me to try?" His voice was smooth, steady, neither submissive nor confrontational. Carson shrugged. If you think you can. Something flickered across Maurice's face. Something small, almost invisible, but deeply tired. All right, he said. The room shifted. You could feel the collective gasp as he moved toward the whiteboard. Maurice didn't rush. He read the equation once on the laptop. Just once. Then he picked up a marker, gently tapping it against his palm the way mathematicians did when their minds were already racing ahead. Trevor leaned in. He's not actually. But before he could finish, Maurice began writing.
Not scribbling.
Not hesitating. Writing. Every stroke was precise. Every symbol flowed naturally, as though he weren't solving the equation, but remembering it. Lines connected cleanly, variables canceled out. The messy jungle of nested functions unfurled into something elegant, almost artistic. It took him 10 seconds. Only 10. When he finished, he capped the marker, placed it neatly on the tray, and stepped back. Carson's jaw clenched. Kyle's eyes nearly doubled. Trevor stuttered. No way. No way, he just... Maurice turned around. His face was composed, gentle even, but holding a firmness none of them had ever seen in him. I'm done, he said quietly. Carson stared at the board, then at the laptop, then back at Maurice. His attempt at laughter came out thin. You cheated. Maurice shut the cleaning cart gently. I don't know how I would have. We don't know what you scribbled, Carson snapped. Maurice's calm didn't waver. I solved it. Trevor whispered. Carson. He got it right. It's correct. That made Carson snap. Shut up. You don't know that. But they all knew. Anyone who understood math could see the elegance, the symmetry of his solution. It wasn't guesswork. It wasn't luck. It was mastery. Maurice didn't gloat. He didn't ask for the money. He simply nodded once and said softly, have a good day. Then he pushed the cart toward the exit, and the silence he left behind felt heavier than any insult. Trevor exhaled slowly. Dude, what just happened? No one answered, because at that exact moment, Carson's phone buzzed with a notification. He glanced down out of habit, and froze. It was a message from his father. A video feed. The thumbnail showed the exact scene in front of him, only from above. Elliot Welling was watching the entire encounter through the hidden surveillance cameras installed in the lounge. Below the video, a single line of text appeared. Call me, now. Carson's throat tightened. His friends waited, confused, but he didn't respond. His heartbeat drummed in his ears as he stepped away from them. Phone pressed to his shoulder. Dad! Carson whispered. What? Elliot's voice cut through the speaker, low and cold. You've made a mistake. A big one. And we're gonna clean it up immediately. The call ended before Carson could reply. He stared at the screen, pale, stunned, because beneath his father's words, there was something else, something he had never heard before. Not anger, not disappointment, fear. Carson's father opens his private surveillance dashboard, zooms in on Maurice's face, and mutters to someone off camera. That man was never supposed to resurface. Maurice Hall didn't sleep much the night after the incident in the lounge. He didn't have to. Sleep was a luxury he stopped relying on years ago, when the sound of keys in cell doors and steel toilets flushing became his lullaby. That night, he just sat on the edge of the twin mattress in his one-room basement apartment, off 127th Street, tracing old scars on his hands, some from cleaning chemicals, others from handcuffs. At Whittendale, he was a ghost with a mop. But before all of this, before the stained gloves and the sideways glances, Maurice was a rising star, top 1% of his class at MIT. By 23, he had already published groundbreaking work on quantum algorithm modeling, and multiple Silicon Valley companies had quietly started scouting him. Professors whispered that he might be the next Claude Shannon, but the whispers stopped the day he got profiled. It started with a busted taillight and ended with his face smashed into the pavement, accused of trying to steal his own car in Cambridge. No one cared that it was registered in his name. No one asked why a black man in a hoodie was even on that campus. He was charged with obstruction and resisting arrest, and when the details got muddy, they added possible assault on an officer, a catch-all charge that couldn't be disproven. MIT distanced themselves immediately. His research access was frozen. Fellow students fell silent. Professors stopped replying. Maurice never even made it to trial. The plea deal came quick. 2 years in a low-security prison in exchange for not contesting the charge. Time served, they called it. Justice, they said. But when he stepped out, the world had already moved on. Grants gone. Reputation in ruins. He was radioactive in every academic circle. So he took the first job that didn't care about degrees or mugshots, a cleaning company subcontracted to elite campuses that never looked him in the eye. That's how he ended up at Whittendale. Every day at 4:45 a.m., he walked the same hallways where students with half his intellect lived on trust funds and family legacies. He cleaned after their parties, erased their whiteboards, vacuumed up their arrogance. They never asked his name. To them he was just Sir if they acknowledged him at all. But what they didn't know was that Maurice still solved equations in his head while wiping their coffee spills. He still read dense journals in public libraries. He still kept a beat-up Lenovo laptop in his locker, loaded with algorithms and encryption scripts he wrote at night, and taped to the inside of that locker door, behind the faded photo of his mother, was an unopened envelope. The envelope had a crimson seal on it, Harvard's crest. It was dated 6 years ago. It had arrived the day after his release from prison. A letter of acceptance into a postdoctoral fellowship, a lifeline extended by a black professor who had quietly followed his case and pushed for his inclusion. But by the time Maurice saw it, he was already mopping floors and couldn't afford the risk. He never opened it. He never responded. Instead, he buried it in denial, taped it inside his locker, and tried to forget what potential used to feel like. Until yesterday. Until Carson Welling. Until that moment when the smug heir to a fortune had the audacity to bet $10,000 that Maurice, the janitor, couldn't solve a single equation. And when Maurice did solve it, in 10 quiet seconds, the room went still. Maurice hadn't done it for money. He didn't want the applause or the gasps. He did it because he needed them to know that he wasn't invisible. That their assumptions, their arrogance could shatter in under a minute. He walked away before the silence could catch up to him. But inside, something was shifting. Not rage, not pride, just a tired ache of having to prove, once again, that he was more than what they saw. The next morning, Maurice opened his locker. He reached for his gloves, but paused. His fingers brushed the old envelope. The seal was still unbroken, but beneath it, something else had been slid between the locker wall and the envelope. A new envelope. Smaller, thinner, unmarked. Maurice slowly pulled it out. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Inside, one sentence was written on a torn piece of printer paper. You were never meant to stay hidden. No name. No return address. He stared at the note for a long time, heart pounding in a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not anxiety, but momentum, like a door cracking open. He slid the original Harvard envelope out of its tape, stared at it like it was a bomb. And then, just as his fingers began to pry it open, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned, and standing there, arms crossed, was Dean Halifax, the same man who never looked him in the eye. But now the dean was looking directly at Maurice, with a strained smile. "Mr. Hall," he said evenly, "I believe we need to have a conversation." The dean isn't alone. Just behind him, Carson Welling stands watching, expression unreadable, phone already recording. Carson Welling hadn't felt humiliation like that in years, if ever. The sting of it didn't fade when Maurice walked out of the lounge. It festered, a silent storm building behind his perfectly maintained image. In a space where power meant never being corrected, where money filtered reality to suit your ego, Carson had been exposed in front of his peers, and not just exposed, eclipsed, by a janitor. It wasn't the $10,000 he'd never intended to pay. It wasn't even about the laughter that slipped from Trevor's mouth when he realized Maurice had solved the problem. It was the look in Maurice's eyes when he walked away. Not smug, not defiant, just done. Carson wasn't used to being dismissed, especially not by someone whose uniform bore bleach stains and sweat. He replayed the scene over and over that night, in his dorm, the curtains drawn, lights off, laptop screen illuminating his face. He watched Maurice's hand glide across the whiteboard. He zoomed in on the footage from the surveillance app his father installed on all donor-funded buildings. Originally for security, but really for control. Every angle showed the same thing. A man who didn't just solve an equation, but shattered the lie of intellectual superiority Whittendale's elite clung to. Carson's fingers hovered over the keyboard. At first he searched out of curiosity. Who was Maurice Hall, really? What he found shocked him. A handful of dated public court records. Massachusetts, 2015. The charge: resisting arrest. Minor assault. No trial. Plea deal. A short sentence in a low-security facility. There it was. A record. One click away. Carson sat back, the corners of his mouth lifting. This wasn't just about a math problem anymore. This was about restoring the natural order of things, as he saw it. The smug kid from the janitor closet had embarrassed him. Now Carson would remind everyone exactly where men like Maurice belonged. The next morning, he brought the records to his father. Elliot Welling sat in a high-rise corner office in downtown Manhattan, floor-to-ceiling windows casting a glare across a desk too polished for actual work. He read through the file, silent for a long time. So, Carson asked, "What do we do?" Elliot didn't look up. "You were foolish to provoke him." "I didn't know he was." "You didn't think," Elliot snapped. "You acted like a child. And now your name is attached to a viral video making you look like a privileged idiot who got owned by the help." Carson's jaw tightened. "So we spin it." Elliot finally looked up. "We bury him." The next steps came swiftly. An anonymous Reddit post appeared, claiming Maurice Hall had threatened students in the past. A concerned student tweeted vague allegations about him being unstable. The whispers moved through Whittendale like poison in water. No one knew where the rumors came from, but they spread fast, infecting every conversation. Within 48 hours, an anonymous blog post surfaced, linking to Maurice's old court documents. Though vague, it painted him as a violent ex-con with an unknown motive for working on campus. Phrases like security risk and potential threat were used, with no substantiation. The student body, primed by years of bias and unspoken prejudice, didn't ask questions. "How'd he even get hired?" someone murmured during a lecture. "Campus must have been desperate," another replied. Maurice noticed the shift instantly. Doors that once stayed open were quietly shut. Eye contact vanished. Professors who used to nod now glanced away. Students who had never paid attention before suddenly whispered when he passed. He'd seen this before. This wasn't about safety. It was about signaling. And then came the email. On a Thursday morning, while Maurice was sorting supply inventory in the basement janitorial office, his phone buzzed with a message from a concerned staff member he once helped move offices. The subject line chilled him. "Urgent. Allegation of academic misrepresentation. Maurice Hall." He tapped it open. The email was from the university's Office of Academic Integrity. It claimed they had received a credible tip, suggesting that Maurice had misrepresented academic qualifications in order to gain access to secure academic areas of campus, implying he had used those credentials to access sensitive research or student records. Maurice stood frozen. It was nonsense. He had never once used his old credentials, never posed as faculty, never touched academic property outside of janitorial duties. But the accusation was enough. In institutions like Whittendale, perception was policy. No matter how absurd, once something like that entered the system, it became real, at least until it crushed the accused. He walked down the hallway, past rows of echoing lockers, toward the administrative offices. His steps were steady, but his chest felt tight. The silence he once welcomed now felt loaded, every quiet conversation ending when he walked by. One administrator glanced up as he passed, then quickly turned her monitor away. Maurice reached the dean's office. The receptionist, who used to greet him with casual friendliness, avoided his eyes. "They're in a meeting." Maurice nodded, didn't argue. He turned and left. Outside, the wind had picked up. Clouds moved fast across the sky like something was rushing to unfold. He sat on a bench just outside the library. From there he could see students laughing, headphones in, running to class, untouched by the quiet war happening behind the scenes. His phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't a message. It was a link. No sender. Just one line. "Check the campus news bulletin. Page 3. Maurice's pulse kicked. He opened the site. There it was. An anonymous leak. A short paragraph tucked into a campus rumors section. Sources claim janitorial staffer Maurice Hall, previously imprisoned, may have falsified credentials. An internal inquiry is underway. The university declined to comment. No denial. No correction. Just enough room for doubt. Maurice stared at it. They were painting him as a fraud, not just a janitor, a liar, a threat. All because he solved an equation he was never supposed to touch. And all because Carson Welling couldn't handle being wrong. He leaned back against the bench, the hum of campus life all around him, detached. It wasn't the lies that stung most. It was how easily the system welcomed them. How quickly they latched on to the idea of the dangerous black man who had tricked his way into their pristine world. Then a voice from behind. You should have stayed quiet. Maurice turned sharply. It was Trevor, Carson's friend. But Trevor looked uneasy, as though regret had started settling in. I didn't post anything, he said. But Carson, he's out for blood. And his dad, they're not going to stop. Maurice's voice was low. Why tell me? Because it's not just about you anymore. Trevor said. I overheard something. Something about your past. Something they're planning to leak next. Maurice narrowed his eyes. What? Trevor hesitated, glancing around. They know about your time at MIT. About what happened in Cambridge. Maurice felt it then, that knot of history tightening in his gut. How do they know that, he asked. Trevor looked down. Carson hired someone. A private investigator. Got your records unsealed. Your prison transcript. Everything. Maurice stared at him. Trevor looked sick. I'm sorry, man. But sorry wouldn't matter now. Because they were digging. And once they unearthed what they wanted, they wouldn't stop until he was buried. That night, Maurice receives an unmarked envelope slid under his door. Inside, a photocopy of the original Harvard acceptance letter. But this time, with the words revoked stamped across it in red. Maurice didn't sleep that night. The envelope with revoked stamped across his Harvard letter sat on the chipped kitchen table like a threat. Not loud, but surgical. There was no return address, no explanation, just that single word. Red, heavy, final. It wasn't the letter itself that disturbed him. It was the timing. Carson's revenge campaign had already crossed the boundaries of whispers and rumor. Now it was psychological warfare. And someone, somewhere, had dug deep enough to replicate an exact version of the letter he never even opened. Someone knew too much. The next morning, Maurice walked onto campus like a man entering a courtroom. No uniform, no gloves, just a navy blue sweater, khakis, and the same expressionless calm that had carried him through far worse. The usual murmurs followed him through the main quad. He's still here. Didn't they fire him? I heard he forged a degree. Maurice ignored them. He didn't flinch. Instead, he walked directly toward the administration building and entered through the front doors, where he had always been asked to use the back service entrance. This time, no one stopped him. Dean Halifax's office sat behind an oak-paneled door at the end of a hallway adorned with portraits of pale, unsmiling men who had long passed. It was a hall where legacy walked, and where people like Maurice had never been invited to linger. The receptionist blinked when she saw him. Do you have an appointment? I don't, Maurice said. But I think he'll see me. Before she could protest, the office door opened. Dean Halifax stood there, crisp gray suit, pocket square matching his tie. His smile was thin, strained, the kind that said everything was already decided. Mr. Hall, he said, gesturing to the room. Please, come in. Maurice stepped inside. The air smelled like polished wood and silent verdicts. The dean shut the door softly behind them, walked around to his desk, and sat down. He didn't invite Maurice to sit. I imagine you've seen the email, Halifax began. His voice was calm, even, like a doctor delivering bad news he didn't personally care about. I've seen a lot, Maurice replied, standing tall. Some of it fake, all of it familiar. Dean Halifax folded his hands. I understand you feel this is unfair. I don't feel anything, Maurice interrupted, tone measured. But I know what it looks like when a system tries to erase someone. There was a long pause. The dean sighed, leaning back. Given recent concerns raised by students and staff, he began replacing you on administrative leave, effective immediately. Maurice didn't blink. With pay? Halifax shook his head. Unpaid. Maurice tilted his head slightly. Based on what evidence? Mr. Hall, please understand, this isn't punitive. It's precautionary. The university has a duty to maintain a safe and comfortable environment. For who? Maurice asked. The students uncomfortable with a janitor who solved a math problem? Or the donors afraid I might remind them genius doesn't always come wrapped in white skin and trust funds? Halifax didn't respond. He just looked away, the way a man does when faced with something he's too cowardly to admit. Maurice didn't press him. He didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. Dean Halifax reached into a drawer and pulled out a plain envelope. Your badge. Please return it. We'll notify you when the inquiry concludes. Maurice took the envelope, slid the plastic ID out, and placed it on the desk. You won't, he said quietly. The dean blinked. Excuse me? You won't notify me, Maurice repeated. Because there won't be an inquiry. There'll be whispers. Then silence. Then you'll quietly scrub me out of the system and move on. Halifax adjusted his cuffs. I'm sorry you feel that way. Maurice looked him dead in the eye. No. You're relieved I feel that way. Because it means you don't have to answer for anything. He turned and walked out without waiting for dismissal. Outside, the whispers grew louder. Some students stared, others smirked. Trevor stood near the library steps, watching Maurice like he wanted to say something, but didn't. He just lowered his eyes. That night, Maurice packed his things in silence. The tiny apartment, barely more than a glorified closet, didn't take long to clear out. One duffel bag, a laptop, a folder of letters he hadn't opened in years, and something else. A small USB drive. He sat at his desk, staring at it. The drive held backups of every research file he'd recovered from his days at MIT, cleaned, organized, encrypted. It held his original AI models, early versions of data prediction algorithms, that had they reached the right hands, could have changed entire industries. But more importantly, it held proof. Proof of who he was before they turned him into a number. Proof that once upon a time, Maurice Hall was a mind people envied, until the wrong skin color in the wrong neighborhood rewrote his story. He slid the drive into a padded envelope, sealed it, and wrote a name on the front in bold black ink. Dr. Sidney Rourke, a mathematics professor at Whittendale. One of the few who had once nodded at Maurice like he was human. Not friendly, not warm, but respectful. A kind of respect that held weight. She had once supervised a research grant at MIT, years before Maurice's fall. They had never spoken, but she had looked him in the eye. And right now, that was enough. At sunrise, Maurice dropped the envelope in the campus mail chute and walked off campus without saying goodbye. By noon, the rumors had grown cruel. Students joked about him in group chats. Memes circulated. Maurice's face photoshopped onto mugshots. A fake screenshot of him threatening students made its rounds. One anonymous Reddit thread claimed he was building a bomb in the basement. No one believed it, but no one cared enough to stop it. Maurice disappeared like a ghost. And just like that, Whittendale moved on, until Professor Rourke found the envelope. She was in her office, grading papers, when it was slid under her door. Curious, she picked it up, turned it over, and saw the name. Her own. She opened it carefully, eyes narrowing as she slid the USB drive into her laptop. At first there was silence. Then the screen filled with lines of code. Equations. Projections. A master file labeled Ghost Protocol, Predictive Systems v2. Her eyes widened. And then, at the very bottom of the drive, one final file. A video. She clicked it. Maurice appeared on screen, seated in his dim apartment, looking directly into the camera. If you're watching this, he began, it means they've tried to erase me. Again. But before they succeed, you need to see what I've built, and what they buried. He paused. I'm not asking for rescue. I'm not asking for redemption. I'm asking for the truth to survive. The video ended. Professor Rourke sat frozen, staring at the screen, the soft hum of her office suddenly sounding like thunder. She reaches for her phone to call the department chair, but her email inbox pings first, with a legal notice ordering her to destroy the USB immediately. Professor Sidney Rourke did not frighten easily. She had survived 2 decades inside the cutthroat world of academic mathematics, a world filled with territorial colleagues, bruised egos and committees that moved like glaciers. But the moment she finished watching Maurice Hall's video, a cold tremor slid through her, something she hadn't felt since her early postdoctoral days when she wrote a controversial paper and received anonymous threats demanding she retract it. The legal notice sitting in her inbox made her skin prickle. Destroy the USB immediately. University protocol. Do not share the contents with any internal or external parties. It had no signature, no office stamp, no chain of command markers.
That alone made it dangerous.
She stared at the screen. The lines of Maurice's code still open in another window. The formulas were unlike anything she'd seen published in academic circles. Not just complex, revolutionary, elegant where they should have been chaotic, predictive where they should have been theoretical. It was the kind of work that didn't just advance a field, it uprooted it. Sydney had spent her entire career chasing beauty in numbers. Maurice's algorithms weren't just beautiful, they were terrifying. Her office door creaked. A student poked her head in. Dr. Rourke? The TA meeting. Cancelled, Sydney said sharply, surprising herself with the edge in her voice. The student blinked and retreated. Sydney shut the door, locked it, and leaned against it. Her heart was pounding in a way that didn't feel purely academic. Maurice Hall was not supposed to be a janitor. He was not supposed to disappear, and whatever he had built, the world was not supposed to have it. Sydney walked back to her desk and scrolled through the main directory again. The file names alone made her breath catch. Quantumated predictive compression, behavioral pattern cascades, macro-scale market mapping, and then one folder, password protected, Welling model, exploit patch. She didn't know what that meant, but she recognized one pattern immediately. These weren't abstract mathematical puzzles. These were systems. Systems that could disrupt everything from algorithmic trading to military defense simulations. Systems that could read behavioral patterns at a scale no public institution had ethically approved. Systems that in the wrong hands could manipulate markets, elections, social behavior, the very structure of society. She whispered, voice barely audible. My God, Maurice, what did they take from you? She clicked back to the video. Maurice recorded. His eyes in the frame were steady, resolute, but beneath that steadiness, Sydney saw exhaustion, years of carrying a burden he couldn't share. If you're watching this, he said in the recording, they're already rewriting the story. He paused, swallowing hard. What I built wasn't meant to be hidden. But once they realized how powerful it was, they did what powerful people do. They took it. And when I asked for recognition, they took my future too. Sydney felt her throat tighten. In those few words, Maurice revealed a reality. Academia refused to admit genius wasn't immune to institutional prejudice. It was shaped by it, scarred by it, buried under it. Maurice ended the video with a quiet plea. Don't let them erase me again. Sydney closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the weight of it. Then she made a decision. She unplugged the USB drive from her laptop, slipped it into her blazer pocket, and left her office with swift, determined steps. The legal notice told her someone was watching. That meant someone would also be listening. Staying in the building wasn't safe. She headed toward the mathematics annex. Older, quieter, less monitored. The hallway smelled like chalk dust and stale coffee. The faculty lounge was empty except for an aging vending machine humming softly. She sat in the corner booth and opened her laptop again, her fingers trembling slightly. Sydney began decoding the encrypted files. Not to leak, not to expose, but to understand. Within 20 minutes her breath caught. The equation Maurice solved in the lounge, the one that humiliated Carson, wasn't random. It was a signature, a lock, a piece of an encryption sequence tied directly to one of the predictive cascades on the USB. The problem Carson pulled from his father's firm wasn't just proprietary. It was stolen. Sydney leaned forward, her heart thudding. No, this can't be right. She ran the sequence again. It matched perfectly. Elliott Welling's hedge fund had built a multi-billion-dollar modeling system based on the same structures Maurice developed years earlier. Before he was arrested, before he disappeared from academia, before someone lost the trial schedules that could have cleared him. Sydney whispered, they took it from him, and they destroyed him to keep it. Her hands trembled with anger, the raw, bone-deep kind she rarely allowed herself to feel. She clicked deeper into the Welling-related folder. Another encrypted file unlocked, revealing time-stamped drafts of algorithmic designs, all predating Welling Enterprises' patents by months. Maurice wasn't just a brilliant mathematician. He was the original architect of the system the Wellings had built their empire on. The arrest, the ruined reputation, the whispers, the plea deal. None of it was coincidence. They buried him. Sydney breathed. And now they're burying the evidence. Her phone buzzed violently. A call. Unknown number. Sydney froze. Then another buzz. A text message. Dr. Roark, do not open that drive again. This is not a request. Another message immediately after. For your safety, destroy the contents. Sydney's pulse hammered. She typed back one word. Who? 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. A minute passed. No reply. Sydney shut off her phone and shoved it in her bag. She felt watched, cornered. The faculty lounge suddenly felt too quiet, too exposed. She gathered her things and hurried out, her heels clicking sharply on the old floor. As she passed the library's far corner, she froze. A man was sitting on a bench outside, simply watching the building. He wore a beige trench coat and dark sunglasses, even though the day was overcast. He wasn't reading. He wasn't on his phone. He was waiting. Sydney's breath caught. She quickened her pace but didn't run. Running would confirm she had something worth chasing. She cut through a side hallway, down a stairwell, out a service exit, then crossed the quad until she reached the engineering building. Bigger crowds, louder spaces, more witnesses. Only when she reached the fountain did she stop. Her phone vibrated again. This time it was from a colleague in the department. "Sydney, are you okay? There's someone asking around for you. Tall guy. Says he's with compliance." Sydney closed her eyes slowly. The university had moved faster than she anticipated. But they weren't the only ones. Because hidden inside one of the subfolders on the drive, she found something else, something that shouldn't exist. A partially encrypted message labeled, "Intercept log, federal inquiry." Unresolved. She hadn't had time to decode it, but she recognized enough metadata to know what it implied. The federal government had been aware of the algorithm Maurice built, and someone had been blocking that inquiry for years. Sydney whispered to herself, soft and shaken, "Maurice, what have you walked away from?" By the time she returned to her apartment, that evening, the sun was setting behind the old brick buildings, tinting them burnt orange. She locked the door, double-checked the windows, and placed the USB drive on her dining table. The world outside felt too still, too observant. Then a new thought hit her, one that made her knees go weak. If Maurice knew the algorithm had been stolen, if Welling Enterprises knew he knew, if the university helped cover it, and if the government had once been involved, then the equation Maurice solved in 10 seconds wasn't an accident. It was a signal, a map, a key into a system he once built, and they once hijacked. Sydney suddenly understood something with a clarity that chilled her bones. Maurice wasn't just humiliated that day. He was reclaiming something, reactivating something, alerting someone. Her breath caught. She grabbed her coat, ready to leave, ready to find someone she could trust. But it was already too late. Across campus, inside Whittendale's most expensive dormitory, Carson Welling's door burst open. A tall man in a dark windbreaker stepped inside without waiting for permission. His badge flashed under the hallway light. "Carson Welling?" the agent asked flatly. Carson's face went pale. "What the hell? Who are you?" The man held up the badge again. "Federal Intelligence," he said. "We need to talk about the equation you showed a room full of students, and the man who solved it." Carson stumbles back as the agent steps closer and says gravely, "Your family didn't tell you where that equation came from, did they?" Carson Welling had barely processed the NSA agent's question when his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, heartbeat drumming in his ears. 257 missed notifications. At first he assumed it was some group chat spamming memes. Something stupid, something irrelevant, but the agent watched him closely, gaze trained on Carson's face as he unlocked his phone. And then Carson froze. The top notification was from a student he barely knew. "Bro, you're going viral." Another. "Your dad's gonna murder you." Then a link. A link with a thumbnail he recognized instantly. Maurice standing at the whiteboard. Carson, arms crossed behind him. The equation. The video someone had secretly recorded during Carson's $10,000 challenge. The agent leaned in slightly. "You should open it." Carson hesitated, then tapped the link. The video loaded instantly. Shaky, vertical, obviously filmed with a phone hidden behind a backpack. Students whispered excitedly in the background. And then the moment played out in front of the world. Carson's smug grin. Maurice's quiet walk to the board. His steady hands writing symbols with impossible ease. 10 seconds. Silent. And then the caption underneath. "Janitor outsmarts billionaire's son at Yale." Even the university was wrong in the caption. Mislabeled on purpose, because Yale had more shock value than Whittendale. But the internet didn't care. The story had oxygen now. Carson whispered, almost choking, "Who posted this?" The agent didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because the video had already crossed 1 million views. And climbing. Across town, sitting alone in a dim motel room with peeling wallpaper and a draft that slid under the door whenever cars passed. Maurice Hall stared at the same video, only from a different angle. He hadn't meant to check his phone. He had meant to rest, to breathe, to exist quietly again. But the loud ping of his notifications pulled him out of the spiral of exhaustion. He clicked the link, expecting another insult or fabricated allegation. What he found instead stunned him. There he was in grainy 720p, solving Carson's equation, without a word. He watched himself from the outside. Watched his posture, his stillness, the absence of anger on his face, the restraint of a man who had spent years swallowing indignities to survive. But the internet didn't see the quiet resignation. It didn't see the years of lost potential. The algorithms didn't sort for trauma or systemic erasure. They sorted for spectacle. And the spectacle was simple: a black janitor humiliating a white billionaire's son. Within minutes, the comments were pouring in faster than he could read them. Some celebrated it. Some mocked him. But many turned ugly fast. Well, no way he figured that out, probably staged. Doesn't matter. Janitor is still a criminal. Affirmative action strikes again. These people don't belong in those rooms. The words sliced brutally. Not new, not original, but sharp enough to reopen scars. Maurice stared at the feed, breath shallow. He whispered to the empty room, "I didn't ask for this." He shut off the phone, buried his face in his hands as the weight of exposure pressed against his chest. He had spent years trying to disappear. Now the world had dragged him into the center of its hunger. A knock on the motel door jolted him. Maurice stiffened, the old instinct returning, the one that taught him how to freeze without appearing afraid. A voice called gently from outside. "It's just room service, sir." Maurice released a slow breath. He didn't open the door. He just answered quietly, "I'm fine. Thank you." Footsteps walked away. Silence again. He sat back on the bed, staring at the blank wall. The viral video would reach the university by morning. If they hadn't already pushed him out, they would now. Not because of the equation, but because he had become a PR crisis. A liability. A face they couldn't control. But then his phone buzzed again. One notification. Different tone.
Different sender.
He almost ignored it. Then he saw the source. A verified business account. Northbridge Systems recruitment team. Maurice blinked slowly. He opened the message. "Mr. Hall, we saw the video circulating and were impressed by your problem-solving skills. If your interests extend beyond custodial work, we'd like to speak with you about a position on our algorithmic modeling team." Maurice scoffed bitterly. "They don't even know me." Another notification. Another job offer. Then another. And another. 5 in total. Then 9. Then 13. Startups. Tech companies. AI labs. Financial modeling firms. A machine learning think tank. He stared at the screen. Overwhelmed. Stunned. Uncertain. They all wanted what he could do. None cared where he'd been. But even these offers weren't loud enough to drown out the ugliness piling under every post, every repost, every tweet. And then his phone vibrated with a notification he didn't expect.
A DM on an old, unused account.
From a username he recognized instantly. Halcyon Dynamics CTO. His breath hitched. He hadn't heard that name in years. Halcyon Dynamics. A small black-led tech collective he had helped build during his MIT years. Back when he still believed in community-driven innovation. Back when he still believed his genius could exist without someone trying to steal it. Maurice clicked the message. A long paragraph appeared. "Hey Maurice. It's Damon. I don't know if you remember me, but we built the early Cascade prototypes together during your first semester. We saw the video. We didn't know what happened to you. None of us did. We thought you left the field. Had no idea they pushed you out. We're rebuilding Halcyon. And if you're willing, we want you back. Not as a janitor. Not as an employee. As a co-founder again." Maurice stared at the screen. A tremor passed through him. Not fear. Not pain. Recognition. Someone remembered him. Someone remembered the version of him he had almost forgotten himself. He set the phone down carefully, like it was something fragile. His eyes burned, not with tears, but with a pressure he had held in for years. A pressure that came from the realization that the world had stolen from him, buried him, and still expected him to step lightly in the spaces they allowed him. He whispered to the room, "Why now? Why after everything?" But somewhere beneath that exhaustion, something else stirred. Something dangerous. A thought. If his algorithm had been stolen. If his arrest had been orchestrated. If the Wellings had built an empire on his buried work. Then this viral video didn't just expose his intelligence. It exposed their theft. He suddenly understood why the NSF agent had gone to Carson. Why the legal notices arrived in Dr. Rourke's inbox. Why the university moved quickly to erase him again. Because the wrong person had solved the wrong equation in the wrong room. And the world had recorded it. Maurice picked up his phone again. His thumb hovered over the response to Damon from Halcyon Dynamics. He didn't write yet. He didn't know if he could trust anyone. But the past had found him, and the future was trying to pull him towards something he wasn't sure he wanted. Before he could decide, another notification popped up. A news alert. Whittendale University releases statement. We are investigating concerning behavior by a staff member. Maurice closed his eyes. They had officially begun weaponizing the narrative. He stood up slowly, breathing steadily, grounding himself. The motel room felt too small for what was unfolding around him. He walked to the window, parted the curtains just a little. The parking lot was empty. Night pressed down quietly. Then, headlights turned into the lot. A car, black, government plates. Maurice stepped back, heart pounding. His phone vibrated again with a new message. From Damon. Shorter this time. Urgent. Where are you? We need to talk face to face. Maurice stared, torn between fear and the pull of an old life waking in him. He didn't know what to trust. As he stood there frozen, the black car door opened. A man stepped out, tall, suit, government badge glinting under the motel lights. And at the exact same second, Maurice's phone vibrated one more time. A final job offer. This one unlike the others. The subject line, rear algorithm. Maurice opened it and froze. The sender was the last person he ever expected to hear from again. The black-led tech firm he co-founded, the one that still owned part of his earliest patents, was offering him not just a job but full partnership. As Maurice reads the offer, a knock echoes on his motel door, and the man outside says quietly, Mr. Hall, we need to discuss your algorithm before someone else gets to you first. The knock on the motel door echoed in Maurice's chest, long after the sound faded. He didn't open it. Not yet. He simply stood there in the dim light, breathing slowly, trying to steady the storm inside him. The man outside waited, silent and patient, like someone who knew he would eventually get what he came for. Maurice stepped backward, hands trembling slightly, and sank onto the edge of the bed. His phone still displayed the message from Halcyon, an invitation to rejoin the world he lost, a doorway into the life that was stolen before it even began. But before he could process the offer, another vibration rattled the phone. Another notification. A link from an unfamiliar email. Subject, your past is coming back. You deserve to know what they hid. Maurice clicked it cautiously. It opened to a scanned PDF, grainy and warped at the edges, like it had been copied too many times. The title punched him in the stomach. Massachusetts Department of Corrections. Inmate Hall. Maurice L. Correspondence file. Someone had leaked his prison letters. His hands tightened around the phone. The motel room blurred. Not from tears, but from memory. 8 years earlier, Maurice had entered the Massachusetts State Prison, at dawn. A cold morning, one of those days where the sun looked pale, like even it didn't want to witness what was happening. Officers processed him with assembly line detachment. They took his shoelaces, his belt, his dignity. They shaved him, photographed him, assigned him a number. He tried to hold himself upright, but every step felt like sinking deeper into a hole he didn't dig. He remembered the guard's voice. Flat. Uninterested.
Name?
Maurice Hall. Occupation? Graduate researcher. The guard didn't bother hiding his smirk. Not anymore. When they escorted him to his cell, the hallway buzzed with fluorescent lights. Cells lined both sides like a gallery of forgotten lives. Men looked out through the bars, silent or curious or hungry for distraction.
Maurice didn't make eye contact.
He couldn't. Inside his cell, the metal bunk felt colder than the concrete beneath it. He sat with his elbows on his knees, listening to the sounds of incarceration, voices muttering in the next unit, the scrape of plastic trays down the hall, a distant shout. Prison was not chaos, as TV shows liked to portray. It was routine, calculated, predictable in the worst possible way. The judge had given him 4 years.
4.
For a crime he never committed. The police had stopped him on his way back from the MIT lab, claiming he matched the description of a robbery suspect. They pinned him to the ground before asking a single question. When he tried to explain, panic bubbling in his throat, they accused him of resisting. The prosecutor painted him as agitated, evasive, possibly violent. MIT withdrew support immediately. The rich donors attending the case? Silent. The witnesses? None. The truth? Inconvenient. 4 years. He spent the first month barely speaking. He kept to himself, read the old math textbooks in the prison library, and tried to keep his mind from unraveling. But word got around. Inmates learned quickly that the quiet black man in cell 18 solved equations faster than most people solved breakfast choices. One afternoon, a man named Travis, older, tattooed eyes weary but sharp, stepped into the library and slid a notebook onto Maurice's table. "You're the one who knows calculus," he said. Maurice met his eyes cautiously. "I know some." Travis chuckled. "Brother, rumor says you know everything." Maurice almost smiled. "Rumor exaggerates." Travis opened the notebook. It was filled with equations written by someone who didn't fully understand them. Fundamentals, half-finished derivatives, scratched out attempts. "My daughter's in high school," Travis said. "Wants to be an engineer. She sends me her homework sometimes. I can't help her. Could you?" Maurice didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I can help."
That was the beginning.
From that day, men lined up with notebooks, GED prep sheets, handwritten problems their children mailed them. Maurice taught them patiently, gently, without ego. He explained concepts with metaphors and drawings. He stayed late after lights out, whispering solutions through cell bars like forbidden knowledge. And for the first time inside those walls, he felt useful. One night, Travis said quietly, "They took your life from you, didn't they?" Maurice didn't respond. He didn't have to. Travis tapped the notebook. "Then don't let them take this part too." But even as Maurice tried to rebuild scraps of dignity, the system found new ways to punish him. Guards lost his mail. One letter from his mother took 7 months to reach him. A graduate advisor who tried to vouch for him suddenly stopped writing. Later, Maurice learned the man had been warned. Supporting Maurice would reflect poorly on the institute. In his second year, Maurice filed 3 official complaints about a guard who routinely targeted him for random inspections. All 3 complaints disappeared. He tried not to let bitterness consume him, but some days it wrapped around his ribs like a tightening band. Racism in prison wasn't loud. It wasn't shouted. It was in the small routines. Who got searched? Who got written up? Who got privileges denied? Who got protection when fights broke out? Who got ignored? Maurice witnessed it all. He lived it. And he kept writing letters, hundreds of them, to lawyers, professors, judges, advocacy groups. He wrote about his case, about the missing evidence, about the inconsistencies, about how one of the arresting officers, later fired for misconduct, falsified 2 statements. Most letters came back marked undeliverable. Some never came back at all. And now in the motel room, Maurice saw them again for the first time. Every letter he wrote, every plea, every unanswered cry for justice. Someone had collected them, scanned them, and sent them to him. The PDF kept scrolling. His throat tightened painfully. A letter appeared that he barely remembered writing. "To whom it may concern, I believe my research was stolen. My files went missing after my arrest. I believe someone at MIT or affiliated institutions took my algorithm drafts." He had written that one during his second winter in prison, after hearing rumors from a guard who overheard MIT people talking about a disgraced kid whose work had fallen into the right hands. Maurice had felt paranoid writing it. Except, it hadn't been paranoia. Not anymore. Scrolling. Scrolling. Then a letter that made his pulse stop. This one wasn't addressed to an attorney, professor, or advocacy group. It was addressed to a single name, Elliot Welling. Maurice stared at it, stunned. He had forgotten this letter existed. But seeing it again, everything rushed back. The day he saw Elliot Welling's name in a newspaper article about hedge fund algorithm patents. The day he recognized parts of his own stolen work embedded in the descriptions. The day he in desperation wrote Welling directly demanding an explanation. He had never received a response. Of course he hadn't. But now, looking at the letter, Maurice noticed something else. Something he never saw before. A red stamp. Received, dated, processed. Someone at Welling Enterprises had seen it and buried it. Maurice's hands shook violently. He whispered, "They knew, they always knew." A soft ping startled him. His phone lit up with a new message, a different link, from the same anonymous contact. This time it led to a news alert. Independent journalist to publish exposé on Whittendale scandal. Claims to have evidence of donor interference. Maurice's stomach twisted. He clicked again. A photo appeared. A woman standing outside a newsroom, holding a folder, speaking to a camera crew. Reporter Lila Grant, a respected investigative journalist, known for exposing corporate corruption, and in her hands, the folder contained the scanned letters. Maurice's heart raced. Someone had leaked everything to her. But before he could process that, his phone vibrated again, this time with a live text update. Breaking journalist discovers one of the prison letters was addressed to hedge fund titan, Elliot Welling, father of Whittendale student Carson Welling. Developing story. Maurice felt the world tilt. The pieces were falling too fast, too sharp, too dangerous. Someone outside wanted war. Not quiet justice. A war. Another ping hit his phone. A final message from the anonymous sender. Truth is coming. Be ready. As Maurice stared at the screen, the knock came again on the motel door. Firm. No patience this time. As Maurice stands frozen, his phone buzzes again. This time with a photo message showing Lila Grant's car. Vandalized, window smashed. Documents stolen. Someone else is moving faster. The photo of Lila Grant's vandalized car still glowed on Maurice's phone. When the third knock hit the motel door harder than before, the glass in the window rattled. The night outside felt charged, as if something larger than him, larger than Whittendale, larger than the lies he'd survived, was now accelerating beyond anyone's control. Mr. Hall, the voice repeated through the thin wooden door. We're not here to harm you, but we need to talk now. Maurice didn't move. His pulse hammered in his ears. The motel room suddenly felt too small, like the walls were leaning in. He thought of the prison letters, of Elliot Welling's stamped received, of the journalist now standing in danger for daring to touch his story. Everything was converging. Everything he tried to bury. Everything they tried to bury him with. Before he could decide whether to open the door, headlights swept across the window blinds. A second car entered the lot, stopping behind the first. Two silhouettes stepped out, one tall and thin, one broader and wearing a coat too expensive for motel pavement. Maurice exhaled sharply. Of course, he whispered. They sent more. But the knock stopped. Then footsteps. Voices murmuring outside the door. Not urgent, not coordinated. Concern. That was what made Maurice stand up. Concern didn't usually follow him. He approached the door slowly. Mr. Hall, the voice said again, quieter this time. Please, it's about Welling Enterprises. Maurice froze. Every muscle locked. The name hit him too hard. He didn't open the door, but he pressed his palm against it and spoke in a low, steady tone. Who are you working for? A beat of silence. Then, I'm not here on behalf of the university, the man replied, and not the Wellings either. I'm here because someone tipped us off that you were in danger. Who? Maurice asked. Someone who signed their message, an old friend of his mind. Maurice's stomach dropped. He knew exactly who that description belonged to. Dr. Sidney Rourke. He turned the lock slowly, cautiously, leaving the chain in place. The door cracked open. Two men stood there. The thin one was likely the speaker. Dark coat, tired eyes, badge tucked discreetly in his palm. The broader one stood behind him, scanning the parking lot like he expected trouble. We need to speak somewhere safe, the thin man said. Now. Maurice didn't open the door wider. You broke into my past today, he said quietly. At least tell me your name. The man lowered his gaze almost respectfully. Kenton Price. Investigative Division. Independent, not federal, not corporate. We follow money, especially the kind that ruins people. Maurice held his breath. Price continued. And your name has been circling a very specific group of people with very specific influence. Maurice searched his expression for pretense, but found none. Just urgency. He nodded slowly. Give me a minute. He closed the door and braced himself against it. Kenton Price. Not NS.
Not police.
Not university. Someone outside the institutions that had failed him. He grabbed the USB Sydney, returned via message, slipped his laptop into a backpack, and opened the door fully. Let's go, he said. The men led him to the second car, not the black government sedan he first saw, but a silver Toyota with a dented bumper. Price's car. That alone made Maurice trust him more. They drove in silence for 10 minutes before Price finally spoke. The video going viral made bigger waves than you know, Price said. It didn't just embarrass a spoiled legacy kid. It shook loose pieces of a larger puzzle, one that people have been keeping hidden for a long time. Maurice stared out the window. What puzzle? Price exchanged a glance with his partner. You're not going to like this, Price warned, voice level. But you deserve the truth. Maurice didn't turn from the dark city pressing past the windows. I've lived with the truth my whole life. It's the lies that keep blindsiding me. Price nodded slowly. Then here it is. The Welling family isn't just wealthy. They're embedded in the private prison system. Maurice's fingers curled tightly in his lap. I know they're rich, Maurice murmured. I know they're powerful. But prison? Price cleared his throat. They own shares in two of the biggest private prison corporations in the country, companies that have tripled their profits in the last 15 years. Companies tied directly to policies that disproportionately target black communities. Maurice's heart thudded. And, Price continued, voice quieter now, one of those corporations is the one you were incarcerated in. Silence swallowed the car. A heavy, choking silence that settled like ash. Maurice closed his eyes, hearing echoes of steel doors slamming, hearing guards sneer, hearing inmates whisper that certain people inside had friends on the outside. His voice cracked, barely audible. No, that can't be right. It is, Price said gently. We verified it twice. Elliot Welling invested heavily during the period you were imprisoned. Before your arrest, the facility was projected to fall below profit targets. After your intake, numbers rose again. Maurice swallowed sharply, breath unsteady. Price's partner, a quiet, observant man named Deacon, spoke for the first time. These companies profit off high occupancy. They profit off longer sentences. They profit off bodies, especially black bodies. Maurice whispered, so my arrest wasn't just profiling. It wasn't just bad luck. It was business. Price nodded. Your letter from prison? The one you addressed to Elliot Welling? That wasn't a shot in the dark. It hit exactly where it should have. And someone inside his company made sure the letter never saw the light of day. Maurice felt something fracture inside him. The world outside the window blurred. This whole time, he whispered, voice heavy. I thought the system failed me. I didn't realize the system used me. Price didn't respond. He didn't need to. The city lights streaked past the windshield. Maurice stared forward, hollow yet burning. A lifetime of answered questions suddenly felt like a trapdoor under his feet. How far does it go? Maurice asked. Price hesitated. Farther than you think. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a manila folder. Take a look, he said, handing it back to Maurice. Maurice opened it slowly. Inside were documents, stock reports, board meeting notes, internal emails, timelines, patterns, names. Names of judges, names of prosecutors, names of police officers. And then, a familiar name at the bottom of one list. Halifax, Dean Richard, advisory board member, Welling Corrections Investment Group. Maurice felt sick. The dean who fired him. The dean who quietly erased him. The dean who watched him leave campus while pretending to investigate him. He wasn't protecting the university. He was protecting his investment. Maurice's voice trembled. They built a machine and fed people like me into it. Price nodded once, and they got rich doing it. Maurice stared at the papers, hands shaking. How many others? He whispered. Price exhaled slowly. Hundreds, maybe thousands, but only one of them has an algorithm the Welling stole and used to build a financial empire. Maurice's breath caught. Everything was connected. His arrest, the theft of his work, the smear campaign, the viral video, his resurfacing. The Welling family had something to lose. Something big. And Maurice had something they feared. Truth. Price leaned back, watching Maurice through the rearview mirror. They're scrambling now, Price said, trying to shut down every trail that leads back to them. Your viral video was bad for them, but your prison letters? That's catastrophic. Maurice rubbed his temples. Lila Grant has them. She's going public. Price's expression darkened. She tried. Someone broke into her car before she could finalize the report. Maurice's breath hitched. Is she okay? For now, Price replied. But the documents are gone. Maurice whispered. They're destroying the evidence. Trying to, Price corrected. They don't know you also have copies. Maurice stared at his backpack, at the USB drive inside, the same drive containing not just his stolen algorithms, but the seeds of his erasure. What do they do now? He asked. Price didn't answer immediately. They eliminate weak points, he said finally. People who know too much. People who threaten the empire. Maurice felt the weight of the words settle onto him. You're saying I'm next. Price didn't answer. He didn't have to. Maurice turned back to the window. His reflection stared back, older than he remembered, more haunted, but also sharper, stronger. A man who had survived what others hadn't. A man they underestimated. The car slowed as they approached a quiet intersection. Price said softly, We're not here to intimidate you. We're here to protect you. But we can only do that if you're willing to fight back. Maurice looked up. Against them? He murmured. Price shook his head. Against the truth. They've locked away. Maurice didn't respond. He couldn't. Not yet. Price parked in a shadowed alley behind an old newspaper building. "Someone wants to see you," he said. "Someone who can help you decide your next step." Before Maurice could ask who, a light flickered in the second-floor window of the building. A silhouette appeared. A woman. Long coat. Sharp posture. And when she stepped into the light, Maurice felt his throat tighten. Carson's mother, Evelyn Welling. What was she doing here? Price opened the door. "She contacted us an hour ago. Said she had something to confess." Maurice stepped out slowly, confused, heart pounding. And then through the window he saw something chilling. Evelyn Welling was deleting emails from her laptop. Dozens of them. All with subject lines related to Hall case, disciplinary coordination, prison liaison, correspondence, algorithm review. She deleted them quickly, desperately. But she didn't see the small red light blinking on a second device behind her. Someone else was recording her. Someone she didn't know was watching. And as she deleted the last email, Maurice's phone buzzed in his hand. A single message, from the anonymous contact. "She's too late." The final email she deletes flashes briefly on the screen, containing Maurice's name and her own digital signature, approving his arrest. For 6 days, the university said nothing, not a word to the press, no public statement, no internal memo, no apology, not even a denial, just silence. Maurice watched it all unfold from a distance, not surprised, just exhausted. He understood how institutions like Whittendale worked. They didn't react to truth. They didn't bend to justice. They only responded to pressure, financial, reputational, or existential. So when the scandal broke wide, and Lila Grant's stripped-down exposé finally aired in a primetime news slot, albeit without the original stolen documents, the university still did nothing. Even after the headline flashed across America's screens, "Exclusive, University Janitor's Genius Exposes Billionaire Corruption and Prison Profiteering." Even after the tags exploded online, "Justice for Maurice," "Wellinggate," "Academia Race," even after students held a silent protest on campus with Maurice's name taped to their mouths, marching past the Welling Center for Global Finance in solemn defiance. Still, the administration remained unmoved. Until the money started leaving. The first blow came quietly. A leaked email from the Alumni Relations Office showed that a prominent donor, a hedge fund founder from Seattle, had rescinded a $5 million pledge, citing deep concern over the university's moral compass. Then another followed. Then 3 more. By the end of the week, nearly $30 million in expected donor contributions had either been frozen or pulled entirely. And that's when the university cracked. Dean Halifax called an emergency faculty meeting, behind closed doors. Professors were summoned like suspects. Lawyers sat in the back of the room with folders they wouldn't open, and beneath the layers of academic language and PR-approved panic, there was only one goal: protect the brand. Dr. Sidney Rourke sat near the door, arms crossed, watching the farce unfold. She hadn't spoken since arriving, hadn't even acknowledged the dean. But when Halifax cleared his throat and said, "We must address the perception crisis we're facing," her jaw flexed. Perception. Not reality. Not racism. Just a crisis of appearance. A senior literature professor, visibly uncomfortable, leaned forward. "Should we consider issuing a statement, acknowledging the situation? The optics of silence are—"
"We can't comment on an ongoing investigation," Halifax interrupted.
Another hand raised. "And the Diversity Council. They're demanding answers. So are the student unions." Halifax paused, then nodded toward the PR officer seated behind him. "We're forming a diversity and equity response panel, effective immediately." Sidney's eyes narrowed. "With who?" Halifax blinked. "We'll select a cross-section of faculty and advisors with strong public reputations." "Will Maurice Hall be invited to participate?" she asked, voice flat. The room tensed. Halifax smiled the way only a man insulated from accountability could. "That would be inappropriate. He's part of the incident under review." Sidney leaned forward, her voice low but razor sharp. "So you'll build a diversity panel, without the man whose life your institution destroyed, to discuss how to fix what you refuse to acknowledge." Halifax said nothing, because he didn't need to. Because in his mind, Maurice was still the janitor, still the inmate, still the shadow that slipped through corridors quietly and didn't make noise unless spoken to. The meeting dissolved soon after. The next morning, the Diversity and Equity Response Panel was announced. 12 faculty members, 0 students, 0 community leaders, 0 Maurice Hall. The student protests tripled in size. But the administration finally had a soundbite. They issued a formal statement that afternoon. Whitendale University remains committed to exploring all dimensions of inclusion, equity, and academic integrity. We thank our faculty-led panel for their swift engagement with these important concerns. Sydney slammed her laptop shut after reading it. They had weaponized language again. 2 days later, the panel hosted its first public forum in the Grand Lecture Hall of Prescott Hall, the same space where, a year earlier, Maurice had vacuumed crumbs from beneath the rows of seats, while professors debated ethics in AI. Now those same professors sat on stage, microphones clipped, glasses of water at their feet, rehearsed empathy painted across their faces. We must examine the way narratives evolve when unvetted information spreads too fast, one said. This is about larger systemic tensions, not individual grievances, another offered. Maurice stood at the back of the crowded hall, hoodie up, face half-shadowed. No one knew he was there. Not yet. He hadn't planned to attend, hadn't planned to re-enter the belly of the institution that had chewed him up and spat him into silence. But after the silence came the lies. And after the lies came the committee. And still no one said his name. Even as students whispered it outside in chants. Even as journalists filed FOIA requests with state prison boards. Even as former professors privately emailed him apologies they didn't have the courage to send publicly. Still no one on stage said his name, until Sydney stood. She hadn't been scheduled to speak. But she walked up to the microphone, with the slow, certain gravity of someone who no longer cared about tenure or backlash. She looked at the panel, then the audience, then the camera live streaming to the world. We're not here to discuss a mistake, she said. We're here to discuss a pattern, a system, a cover-up. The crowd stirred. Halifax stiffened. Sydney continued. Maurice Hall didn't lose his future. It was taken, piece by piece. First by profiling, then by arrest, then by silence. And when he rose above it all, when he solved a problem meant to humiliate him, this university didn't celebrate him. It retaliated. Murmurs spread through the room. Halifax leaned into the microphone. Dr. Rourke, we agreed this forum would avoid direct. I didn't agree, she cut in. You instructed. I listened. Now I'm speaking. She turned toward the crowd. Maurice Hall was erased because he was brilliant, because he was black, and because the institution built around him was designed never to see someone like him as anything but disposable. Applause broke out from the student section. Gasps followed when someone stood near the aisle. Maurice. He stepped forward slowly, hoodie still up, gaze fixed on the stage. The room fell silent. Sydney's voice didn't waver, and I yield my time to him. Maurice didn't walk toward the panel. He walked up onto the stage itself, taking a breath, letting the tension thicken like static around him. Dean Halifax paled. Mr. Hall, this is not— I'm not here to ask for time, Maurice said. I'm here to take it. He faced the audience, voice calm, clear, unforgiving. You built a panel about inclusion and equity, without including the one person your system tried to erase. And now you want to fix the narrative, without fixing the foundation. He pulled something from his pocket. A folded sheet of paper. He unfolded it slowly, methodically. This, he said, holding it up, is an internal email exchange from 2 years ago. Between Dean Halifax and Welling Enterprises' legal advisor. Gasps rippled across the audience. Sydney's eyes widened. Maurice continued. In it, Dean Halifax discusses neutralizing potential disruption related to my employment. He references my criminal record, which by the way was sealed, and proposes academic justification for separation. Halifax's voice cracked. That's not admissible. Maurice cut in. But it's real. He turned toward the crowd. You erased me for solving an equation. You erased me for surviving. You erased me because I reminded you that intelligence doesn't belong to a single skin tone, tax bracket, or legacy. He stepped down from the stage. You built a machine that profits from erasure, he said. But the problem with ghosts is, they always come back. The room erupted. Some in applause, some in shock, others in panic. Security looked to Halifax for instruction. He gave none. Maurice didn't wait to be escorted out. He left on his own terms. Outside the hall, students gathered around him, not touching, just surrounding, protective in silence. And far above, on the university's internal server, a red notification appeared on a hidden account. Security breach detected Dean Halifax email archive. A minute later, a single file was copied to an anonymous cloud folder. It was labeled, Welling Correspondence, Hall Suppression Bot Idiot. As Maurice walks away, a student live streaming the moment shows a flash drive being slipped into her hand by someone in the crowd, whispering, "This has the rest of the emails," from his mother. Professor Sidney Rourke had never intended to be part of a scandal. She'd built her entire academic career on a reputation of precision, neutrality, and data. She had served on ethics boards, authored peer-reviewed journals, and never once let her convictions outpace institutional decorum. Until now. Because now, decorum was the disease. The morning after Maurice's impromptu speech on stage, Sydney sat in her office with the door locked, her hands trembling slightly, as she reviewed the documents on her laptop for the 100th time. Each file on the USB Maurice had entrusted to her pulsed like a lit fuse. Research logs, timeline drafts, correspondence, and buried deep within it copies of early AI modeling scripts Maurice had built during his MIT tenure, each watermarked with a unique identifier tied to his student credentials. Those same scripts now appeared, nearly identical, in published white papers funded by Welling Defense Holdings, a private subsidiary known for building predictive warfare systems for government contracts. Maurice hadn't just been erased, he'd been stolen. Sydney leaned back, blinking hard. She had uncovered more than just buried academic genius. She had uncovered the precise moment academia betrayed itself, the point where institutions chose silence, money, and prestige over the very minds they were meant to cultivate. She looked at the clock. 11 minutes until the faculty disciplinary board hearing. They were going to try and silence her too. Down the hall in Huxley Hall's largest lecture room, the university had set you an impromptu review session, camouflaged as a procedural hearing. They called it a discussion on breach of confidentiality and misuse of university resources. But everyone knew what it really was. A warning. Sydney entered the room and was greeted by a half-circle of deans, provosts, and legal representatives seated behind a long table. There were no students allowed, no press, only a note-taker, her file, and a sea of cold, rehearsed stares. Dean Halifax wasn't on the panel, but Sydney could feel his fingerprints all over the setup. Dr. Rourke, a gray-haired vice provost, began. "We understand you've accessed private research data, not assigned to your department." Sydney placed the USB drive on the table with a deliberate hand. "That data was given to me by Maurice Hall," she said. "It contains research he authored while still a student at MIT, research which was subsequently used without consent or credit by Whittendale-affiliated interests." The room rustled. "Do you have evidence?" someone asked. "Yes," she replied. "I have time-stamped files, proprietary code, and correspondence logs." Another pause. "Then, and you chose to go public with this information, rather than submit it through internal channels." Sydney held their gaze. "Because your internal channels have already proven incapable of handling the truth." A low murmur followed her words. "Sharp. Dangerous. You're accusing the university of intellectual theft and complicity in racial discrimination." "I'm not accusing," Sydney said evenly. "I'm documenting." One of the attorneys cleared his throat. "You're aware this violates several faculty non-disclosure agreements." Sydney smiled. "You're aware that Welling Enterprises currently holds contracts with the Department of Defense valued at over $2 billion. Contracts built, in part, on models developed by a former inmate who was never credited for his work." Silence. Sydney stood. "You can suspend me. You can fire me. But you can't erase the files. You can't undo what's been exposed. And you can't unring the bell." Maurice Hall just rang in front of the entire world. She left without waiting for their response. And that's when she made the second decision. She went public. That evening, Sydney appeared on a live news segment, hosted by a prominent anchor who had personally covered systemic racism in academic institutions. She brought the receipts, literally, screen captures, timeline charts, academic paper comparisons, and a simple thesis. Maurice Hall was silenced, not just because of who he was, but because of what he created. The story exploded. It wasn't just that the algorithm Maurice developed had been stolen. It was that the university had helped launder it through research collaborations, filtering it from one corporate shell to another, until it emerged branded and repackaged as an innovation from people who had never seen the inside of a prison cell. One clip from Sydney's interview trended worldwide. When black genius doesn't fit within the institution's comfort zone, they don't celebrate it. They erase it, repackage it, and sell it back to the world with someone else's face. The backlash was instant. The university's social media pages were flooded. The student body walked out in protest for the second time in 2 weeks. Professors resigned. Alumni pledged to redirect their donations to prison education programs instead of Whitendale. The administration responded the only way it knew how, by suspending Sidney Rourke. Effective immediately. No hearing. No discussion. Just an automated email. Maurice read the news while sitting in the back of a library in East Harlem. His hoodie pulled low. The notification popped up while he was scrolling through job offers he still hadn't answered. His fingers hovered over the screen, hesitant. She had done what no one else had dared. She had burned the last safe bridge behind her. For him. And that's when he knew what he had to do. He left the library, walked the 3 blocks to the nearest legal aid center, waited 3 hours, and filed a federal whistleblower lawsuit. The filing made headlines the next morning. Former inmate files federal lawsuit against university, defense contractor over stolen AI work. In the 93-page complaint, Maurice named Whitendale University, Welling Enterprises, multiple faculty members, and 2 government liaisons, who had knowingly participated in the unauthorized acquisition, distribution and monetization of intellectual property developed under duress, and later buried under systemic discrimination. The lawsuit outlined Maurice's original research from MIT, the similarities to Welling's defense models, the university's failure to acknowledge or protect his contributions, his wrongful imprisonment, and subsequent academic exile, administrative effort to silence whistleblowers like Dr. Rourke. The complaint was bold, sprawling, and unflinching, and it worked. Within 24 hours, federal investigators requested access to Whitendale's internal communications. By the end of the week, subpoenas were issued. And suddenly, the institution that had built its brand on prestige and legacy found itself at the center of a national reckoning. Maurice sat on a park bench the morning the story broke nationally, watching pigeons bob across the pavement, his phone silent for once. The legal team had warned him to expect pushback, smear campaigns, threats. But for now, there was only stillness. And then, his phone rang. Blocked number. He answered. A familiar voice, smooth and calculated.
Mr. Hall, said Evelyn Welling, you've made quite the mess.
Maurice didn't reply. She continued. We'd like to speak with you, not in a legal capacity, not through lawyers, just a conversation. Maurice stared at the skyline. You're not used to being told no, he said. No, Evelyn replied calmly. But I'm used to solving problems. Maurice's voice lowered. I'm not a problem. I'm the proof. She paused. You were never meant to see this far, she said. But now that you have, you should know, not all of us agreed with how things were handled. Maurice narrowed his eyes. Then show it. Click. The call ended, and an encrypted file appeared on his phone seconds later. He opened it. Inside was a transcript. An email chain between senior faculty and the board of trustees. Subject line, Black Containment Strategy Phase 2. And one of the authors? Dean Halifax. Just below Halifax's signature is a CC line, revealing Evelyn Welling was copied on every single message. For 2 days straight, Maurice's name trended on every major social media platform, but not for the reasons he'd hoped. Justice for Maurice was buried beneath a tide of sarcastic hashtags.
Math filler.
Janitor hacks the system. Inmate to influencer. Fox News ran a segment with a cold blue banner. Convicted criminal alleges racism over math equation. The anchor chuckled as he read the headline. He solved a problem and now wants millions. Maybe next he'll sue the janitor's closet for oppression. Laughter followed. Maurice watched it unfold from his small apartment, hands resting on his knees, eyes dry. The headlines didn't break him. They didn't surprise him. He had always known this part was coming. When a black man disrupts the order, when he claims something white America doesn't think he's entitled to, the machine fires back. First with mockery, then with deflection, then with violence. He didn't flinch at the memes, didn't blink at the edited mugshots, didn't react to the viral tweet that read, he was hired to clean toilets, not rewrite history. But the one that shook him came from a user with 20 followers. My little brother watched that equation video on repeat. Said, he looks like me. That's the first time he's said that about anyone smart. Maurice sat back, let that settle. Then the tide turned. Slowly. It started with a YouTuber named Quincy Fields, a former MIT dropout who ran a channel called Truth in TensorFlow. His video titled "What They Don't Want You to Know About Maurice Hall" broke the algorithm in under 6 hours. Quincy didn't just react to the viral video. He reverse-engineered the math Maurice had solved, tracked down old academic citations, and cross-referenced research funding trails. He posted one slide that dropped jaws across the internet. A side-by-side comparison. Maurice's original research paper draft, time-stamped, Welling Defense Systems patent filing. Quincy leaned into the camera. This man didn't just solve an equation, he exposed an empire. Then came TikTok. Activists, teachers, even high school students began posting videos, dissecting Maurice's story, his arrest, his silence, the prison education programs he built behind bars. They called him a ghost of stolen genius. Within 24 hours, a new wave of hashtags flooded the platform. Black genius silenced. Woodendale wipeout. Hall was here. One video showed a young girl, maybe 10, watching Maurice's viral clip with wide eyes. "I thought janitors couldn't be smart," she said innocently. "But he's the smartest one." That video alone hit 3 million views in a single night. Donations poured into prison education nonprofits. Multiple universities extended honorary degree offers. Halcyon Dynamics released a public statement saying Maurice had been reinstated as a co-founder, retroactively and legally. But the real shift came from a different direction. From inside the Welling family itself. Carson Welling's apartment had become a fortress of denial. He hadn't left the penthouse in days, afraid of the press, afraid of the whispers, afraid of the mirror. The viral video replayed endlessly in his mind. Not the moment Maurice solved the equation, but the moment the room went still. The moment his power stopped mattering. His phone buzzed endlessly. Old friends ghosted him. His father refused to take his calls. His mother, Evelyn, had gone silent after her emails were leaked. He was alone. And then someone knocked on his door. Carson didn't answer. The knock came again. Softer. A familiar voice followed. "Carson, it's me." He opened the door and blinked. His sister stood there. Aubrey Welling, 24, political science major turned nonprofit organizer, the only Welling child who had willingly distanced herself from the family fortune. Her hair was pulled back, her clothes practical. No makeup, no apology in her expression. "I heard about the lawsuit," she said. Carson stepped aside slowly. "You here to gloat?" She shook her head. "I'm here because I've been where you are. Not publicly, but emotionally." He looked at her skeptically. Aubrey stepped into the apartment, gazed around at the untouched catering trays, the shattered TV remote, the echoes of privilege suddenly cracking. "You remember when I told Mom I wanted to intern with a community org in Baltimore?" she said. "And she told me it was beneath our legacy, that it would damage our optics." Carson shrugged. "That's just how she talks." "No, Carson," Aubrey snapped. "That's how she hides it." "Hides what?" Aubrey stared at him. "That we were raised in a house where black people were only ever staff, threat, or obstacle. Never equals. Never leaders. Never safe." Carson didn't respond. So she continued. "I saw the emails too," she said. "Mom deleting things. Dad sending Maurice's prison file to MIT's board years ago, anonymously." Carson blinked. "You knew." Aubrey's voice trembled now. "I knew the pattern. I didn't know the names. Until now." She turned to him. "Maurice isn't a story. He's a mirror. And you helped hold it up for all of us." Carson looked away. "I didn't mean to." "I know you didn't. But the damage is done. Now you have to decide if you're going to stand in the reflection or run from it." She pulled something from her coat pocket. "A small flash drive. Element's private server," Aubrey said. "I accessed it before she shut it down. It has everything. Emails, file transfers, records from the prison board. Some of them are encrypted. But you can give them to Maurice's team." Carson took the drive slowly, like it was burning in his hands. "You trust him?" he asked quietly. "No," Aubrey said. "But I believe in justice. And right now, he's the only one bringing it." She turned to leave. Paused. Then, looked back. "You may not get redemption, Carson. But you might still get relevance. If you do the right thing." And then she was gone. Maurice sat at the kitchen table in his apartment that night, staring at the flash drive Carson had dropped off anonymously. No note, no explanation. Just the drive and an envelope with Aubrey's name on it. He plugged it in, and as the files loaded, thousands of them, his phone buzzed. A video call request.
Aubrey.
He hesitated, then answered. She appeared on screen, voice steady. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she said, but I need you to know, not everyone in that house agreed with what they did. Maurice nodded slowly. Aubrey swallowed hard. What they did to you, they did to me too. Not the same way. But they silenced me, controlled me, told me what kind of woman I had to be. She paused, and I let them until now. Maurice spoke for the first time. I'm not your salvation. I'm not looking for salvation, Aubrey replied. I'm looking for reckoning. A long silence passed. Maurice looked down at the files. Then let's open this thing together. Within hours, a new wave of documents went public. Encrypted contracts, Welling family bribes, university bribes, even transcripts of phone calls between Dean Halifax and Evelyn Welling planning containment. The internet erupted again. But this time Maurice wasn't trending because of a meme. He was trending because of momentum. Because one man's truth, multiplied by allies, platforms, code, and memory, had become a reckoning. And amid the flood of retweets and coverage, one new hashtag emerged. Maurice doesn't fold. It was scrawled on posters, painted on sidewalks, printed on protest banners. Students across the country walked out wearing shirts with the phrase. News anchors debated its symbolism, and when Maurice stepped out of his building the next morning, a crowd waited.
No chance.
Just silence. A kind of reverence. A kind of readiness. A student stepped forward, holding a tablet. You need to see this, she said softly. He took it. A new video loaded. Carson Welling, sitting in front of a camera, live, and what he said in the first 5 seconds stunned the world. My name is Carson Welling. I was part of the lie, and I'm here to testify under oath for Maurice Hall. The screen cuts to black, but not before a figure in a dark conference room whispers to a lawyer, we can't let him testify. You know what that would unravel? It was the trial America never expected, and the one it couldn't look away from. In a federal courthouse 2 blocks from Wall Street, a janitor turned whistleblower stood across the aisle from one of the most powerful families in the country. The case wasn't just about theft. It wasn't just about race. It was about the collision of truth and power, a collision the system had spent decades avoiding. The courtroom was packed. News vans lined the block. Protesters stood shoulder to shoulder with supporters. Signs waved like gospel. Black genius isn't public property. Justice for Maurice Hall. Systemic theft has a price. Inside, Maurice Hall sat quietly beside his legal team, dressed in a dark charcoal suit. No tie, no showmanship, just presence. The weight of years hung on his shoulders, but he sat straight, steady, unblinking. Across from him, Elliot Welling adjusted his cufflinks without looking up. Evelyn Welling wore pearls in quiet contempt. The dean sat further down the bench, his eyes darting like a man who hadn't slept in days. They'd fought to keep this case private. They'd tried to dismiss it, settle it, bury it in arbitration. But the evidence was too deep now. The court had granted Maurice a full public trial under whistleblower protections. And for the first time in his life, Maurice Hall had the floor, and the country had no choice but to listen. Day 1 opened with testimony from Dr. Sidney Rourke. She stood confidently, her voice level, walking the jury through the timeline of Maurice's original AI research at MIT, the unexplained disappearance of his lab access, and the near-identical patent filings from Welling Defense Systems 3 years later. When asked by the prosecutor if she believed the theft was deliberate, she answered without pause, not only deliberate, but facilitated by institutional indifference to who Maurice was. His race made him disposable. His intellect made him exploitable. The Welling legal team tried to rattle her, challenging her credentials, suggesting bias. She never blinked. Day 2 saw an emotional testimony from Travis, the inmate who learned calculus from Maurice behind prison walls. He stood in a pressed shirt, hands shaking slightly, and told the jury, they locked him up for nothing, but he taught us everything. You think the world lost a scientist? We lost our teacher. The courtroom stilled. The defense objected to the emotional appeal. The judge allowed it. By day 4, the public knew the case wasn't just about an equation. It was about a legacy stolen, a system rigged, and a quiet man turned into a symbol of everything the American elite had refused to confront. Maurice finally took the stand on day 5. The air was heavy when he walked to the microphone. He didn't look at the jury right away. He looked at the judge, then the Welling family, then the rows of law students, journalists, and parents watching from the gallery. And when he spoke, his voice was soft, not because he was unsure, but because he knew the truth didn't need to shout. I was told I didn't belong. In classrooms, in research labs, in courtrooms. But I kept showing up, not because I wanted to prove them wrong, but because I couldn't afford to disappear. He paused. They stole my work, then they stole my name. But what they didn't steal, what they couldn't steal, was my memory. The prosecutor approached gently. Mr. Hall, when you first discovered the equation had been used in Welling patents, how did you react? Maurice gave a half smile. I thought I was hallucinating. I thought maybe I left this world and came back in someone else's timeline. But then I remembered how systems work. They don't erase you because you're wrong. They erase you because you're right. And inconvenient. Gasps stirred in the gallery. The defense cross-examined hard. They played clips from the viral video, dissected his criminal record, suggested that his prison term disqualified him from academic recognition. Maurice let them. He didn't flinch when they pulled up grainy mugshots. He didn't interrupt when they quoted his prison file. Instead, he answered, "My record is public. My brilliance had to be hidden. That's the difference." Mid-trial, the unexpected happened. A surprise witness appeared, an anonymous former employee of Welling Defense Systems, granted immunity in exchange for testimony. He was pale, nervous, and clearly terrified. But when he spoke, the court hushed. There was an internal memo, dated before the patent was filed. It included Maurice Hall's research logs. Someone inside MIT handed them over. It wasn't a leak. It was a handoff. He pulled out a printed copy, stamped, signed, time-coded. Even the Welling attorneys looked rattled. The judge called for a recess, but the damage was done. The country watched every moment. Cable networks ran split-screen coverage. Maurice became a symbol. To some, he was a threat, proof that the system could be held accountable. To others, he was a revelation, proof that quiet genius could become righteous fire. Memes changed. The jokes disappeared. Commentators called him the man who sued a machine. Even critics struggled to spin the facts. The court wasn't just revealing misconduct. It was dismantling a framework of complicity. On day 9, the courtroom heard the audio. Someone had leaked a private university board meeting, a recording where Dean Halifax clearly said, "If Hall resurfaces, we bury him again." No headlines this time. The jury went still. Halifax's face drained of color. Maurice sat unmoved. He had already buried every version of himself that cared for their approval. Then, the defense made one final move. They tried to discredit Maurice's lawsuit by targeting his credibility. They argued that he had capitalized on victimhood and enjoyed viral fame as a form of personal profit. They played clips of students cheering him, as if joy was a liability. Maurice sat calmly, watching, then leaned into the microphone and said quietly, "You think my vindication makes this a victory? You think going viral heals what you took? You think being cheered by strangers fixes 4 years in a cage?" He stood. "This isn't about fame, it's about facts. And I'm not standing here because I went viral. I'm standing here because I survived." Silence. The jury watched him like they were seeing the truth for the first time. And then the courtroom lights flickered. A signal someone else was watching. After closing arguments, the judge called for final deliberations. Maurice stepped outside the courtroom, into the evening air. He exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. A reporter shouted a question. "Mr. Hall, do you believe justice is possible here?" Maurice turned, looked the camera dead on. "I believe truth is heavier than silence, and someone finally had to carry it." He walked down the courthouse steps, but he didn't get far, because 2 hours later his lawyer called. Voice tight, "Maurice, we have a problem." Back inside the courthouse, a journalist had snapped a photo. The judge, the one overseeing the case, having lunch in a private bistro on 5th Avenue, with one of the Welling attorneys. Not just any attorney. Lead counsel. They weren't sitting across from each other. They weren't arguing. They were laughing, drinking wine, like nothing was on trial, like no truth had been exposed, like the verdict was already decided. Maurice's lawyer spoke again, softer now. "We may need to prepare for a mistrial." Maurice stared at the phone, at the streetlight flickering in front of him. And for the first time since this began, he felt anger rise again. Not the kind that burns, the kind that builds, the kind that plans. As Maurice hangs up, a man steps out of a nearby alley, presses a business card into his hand, and whispers, "If the court folds, we go to Congress. I've already scheduled the hearing." When the courtroom reconvened after a midday recess, the atmosphere had shifted. The air felt thicker, heavier, as though every whisper in the gallery carried weight. Spectators leaned forward in their seats. Journalists simultaneously scribbled and typed. The judge, once remote and imperious, seemed careful now, trimming preparatory materials. It was the moment Maurice Hall had waited for his entire life without knowing he was waiting. His attorney stood quietly at his side. A single laptop rested on the evidence table. Behind it, a projector screen flickered to life. The jurors' faces hardened. The Welling family exchanged glances. Dean Halifax's eyes narrowed. Maurice took a breath. Not a shaky breath. A deep, controlled one. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, voice steady but resonant. "You have heard testimony. You have seen patterns. You have read allegations. But until now you have not seen the algorithm in motion." A hush fell. On the screen, code ran. Variables scrolled. Graphs pulsed. The projector showed data streams morphing into visuals. What looked like abstract math became vivid. Lines converging, nodes flickering, predictions realized in real time. Maurice's eyes never left the screen. "This is the model I built during my time at MIT. I labeled it Cascade Predictive Matrix V1. It was never meant for the defense market. It was meant for human flourishing, for solving climate simulation problems, for healthcare optimization. But someone else rerouted it." He paused, voice suffused with memory and anger. "You will now see how it traveled from that campus lab, into private hands, into the very network this courtroom examines today." Graphical output appeared. A side-by-side comparison. On the left, Maurice's original model working to identify humanitarian resource flows. On the right, a near-identical version being used in financial defense frameworks. The code matched, names had changed. Branding had shifted, but the architecture remained Maurice's. The audience gasped. The Welling lead attorney shifted. Maurice continued. "If you observe the top right node of each diagram, you'll see the time-stamped correlation. October 12, 2016. MIT Archive. December 3, 2016. Welling Defense Systems filing. That 3-week gap shows the transfer. The audit trail is visible." He pointed to a highlighted line. "Here is the log. Project Cascade release authorized. Internal distribution, WDS, and attached to it, a chain of emails between WDS legal counsel and Whittendale University's research office." The courtroom's collective breath seemed to pause. The judge tapped his pen. Maurice's voice softened. "I am not a former janitor who solved a challenge. I am a former researcher who was silenced. My incarceration? My erasure? Not collateral damage, symptomatic." A hand from the Welling attorney rose. "Objection. This is beyond the scope of the trial as filed." Maurice didn't flinch. The judge allowed the continuation. Maurice clicked a remote. New slide. Video footage inside the model run, at the center. He pressed play. A simulation played, predicted defense contract profits, incarceration growth metrics, racial profiling algorithms. The model projected how many people of certain demographics would be incarcerated over the next decade, under existing policy. Then it showed how modifying variables, like income threshold, race marker, previous record flags, altered projected profits. Shock rippled through the courtroom. For the first time in their life, jurors weren't just hearing maths. They were seeing the cost of it, laid bare. Maurice's voice cracked with intensity. "This is the algorithm they bought. This is the future they wagered on. And this is the proof that my work was used to build a system that profits from my imprisonment." Dean Halifax exhaled audibly. His face drained. The Welling matriarch Evelyn covered her mouth. Elliot stared at his watch. Maurice took a step forward. "Now I ask you, when I solved the equation in 10 seconds, in that study lounge, what did you think I was solving? A puzzle? A brag? No. I was retrieving the key. The key to a machine built to keep people like me quiet and compliant. They bet 10 grand. I couldn't do it. They didn't realize the equation wasn't theirs to bet against." A roar of gasps followed. The prosecution sat back, pensive. The defense lawyers conferred. Their heads low. Maurice closed his presentation. "I yield the floor." Silence. The judge cleared his throat. "No further evidence will be accepted after this presentation, he declared. We will now adjourn to consider verdict. But the unexpected twist came not in the verdict, but in the court's next action. Moments later, the judge left his bench. Reporters crowded the hallway. Jurors exited one by one. The gallery emptied gradually. Everyone expected the verdict to come within hours. Instead, the judge motioned for a private caucus with the attorneys and lead investigators. The doors closed. Maurice and his legal team stood waiting. Outside the door, a hush spread. Then the judge returned. Expression blank. I'm delaying the verdict, he announced. Pending review of evidence adequacy and legal standing of the model. A new hearing will commence in 30 days. Silence exploded. Protesters shouted. The gallery erupted in chaos. Students stood, chairs scraped, phones raised. The Welling family held their breath. Lawyers scrambled. Maurice looked around the courtroom. For a moment he allowed frustration to surface. But then he inhaled and squared his shoulders. He realized the delay wasn't defeat, it was acknowledgement. Someone somewhere acknowledged that the trial had just shifted to something bigger than the legal system. In the hallway, cameras flashed, reporters screamed, students chanted. The hashtag Maurice doesn't fold blazed again. This time with intensity. And compute the truth emerged. A young activist walked up to Maurice, tears in her eyes. You changed everything, she whispered. You showed them. Maurice nodded. We changed the story. And across the courtroom, in a private booth, a figure recorded the moment, a thin woman with dark hair, eyes hidden behind glasses. She typed a message on her phone. Archive. Hall case phase 2 initiated. Maurice didn't know who she was, but he sensed she belonged to the same movement that just found its voice. Outside, cars honked in solidarity. Protesters climbed tree branches to chant. The university's facade loomed behind them. Maurice turned to his attorney. What now? The attorney clasped Maurice's shoulder. We prepare for Congress. If the courts stall, democracy doesn't. Maurice exhaled, the weight of everything he'd carried lifting slightly. He remembered what Dr. Work told him months ago. Truth is heavier than silence. Someone finally had to carry it. He realized he was carrying more than he thought. More than his stolen work. More than years of erasure. He was carrying change. And as he stepped off the courthouse steps, he saw the Welling headquarters across the street. A glass tower, mirrored, reflecting the city. Inside, lights still glowed late. And he knew the fight was far from over. Because when the system delays justice, it signals fear. And Maurice Hall was no longer an accidental rebel. He was the architecture of disruption. As Maurice turns to leave, his attorney's phone vibrates with a confidential message. Closed-door executive meeting, initiated. Welling family to vote on asset freeze. You've got 3 hours. The story of Maurice Hall no longer belonged only to one university or one courtroom. It spilled into living rooms across America, into high school classrooms, into late-night talk shows, on social media feeds, where every reaction was measured, reposted, dissected. Suddenly, the quiet janitor turned whistleblower had become a national fault line. In small towns and big cities alike, rallies formed. A Saturday afternoon in Atlanta saw a crowd of thousands gathering around a banner that simply read, "Return Maurice Hall to the labs." High school teachers handed students printed timelines of his work. College professors wrote op-eds under headings like, "When Black genius isn't protected, it's punished." Some schools offered him honorary lectureships and demanded formal apologies from their campuses. At the same time, dark corners of the web bristled with hate. Neo-segregationist message boards posted threads entitled "Janitor Scandal." System had it right. A tweet that went semi-viral read, "Next they'll give janitors Wall Street bonuses." Commenters argued whether Maurice's rise was proof that meritocracy existed, or proof it never did. The divide was raw and visible. News anchors split their panels like referees in a boxing match. One anchor opened the segment. "Tonight we ask, is this vendetta or vindication?" Across the screen were headshots of Elliot Welling and Maurice Hall, side by side under the banner, "Clash of Giants." Celebrities weighed in. A major actor tweeted, "Black brilliance shouldn't have bail conditions," while a billionaire investor posted, "Prosecute the system, not the whistleblower." Politicians sensed the tremor. A senator in Illinois read portions of Maurice's lawsuit in a committee hearing, declaring if a Harvard-accepted prodigy is washed out and forgotten because of his color and class, what system protects ours? Meanwhile, a congressman from a rural district released a statement. This case shows our universities are playing social justice theater while exploiting real people. Yet the reaction wasn't monolithic. Dinner table discussions mirrored the divide. Older parents said, "He got what he deserved." Younger ones responded, "He got what we all might get if the system doesn't change." A Buddhist meditation teacher in Minneapolis told her class, "See the equation Maurice solved. See how quickly you dismissed it. What does that tell you about your assumption?" In Washington, D.C., the Department of Education quietly sent a memo to major universities, advising them to review employment practices, research protections, and post-incarceration hiring protocols. It was the first time such guidelines referenced a janitor algebra scandal, but the ripple had begun. Across nearly 40 states, student governments passed symbolic resolutions. We Stand with Maurice Hall. A network of historically black colleges posted an open letter. He embodies the promise denied to many of us. The hashtag Justice for Maurice lit up again, with new urgency. It trended for days. But alongside support surged backlash. Hate groups organized flash mobbing of protests, set up websites claiming Maurice's case was a fraud, plotted online campaigns under Stop Hall hysteria. The line between debate and harassment blurred. A charter school teacher in Florida received threatening emails after posting a resource packet about Maurice in class. A local council member in Ohio described the case as an academic circus driven by identity politics. In the middle of the national storm, Maurice remained a pivot of calm. His apartment suited him now, sparse, quiet, distant from campus, insulated from spectacle, but never immune to it. He read every story, every tweet, every editorial. He felt pride when a student in Seattle changed his major to applied mathematics because of him. He felt fear when a mural in his old neighborhood was defaced with crude caricatures. He felt exhaustion when his inbox flooded with messages from strangers needing him to speak, to lead, to embody change. One afternoon, Maurice sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. A short video posted by a TikTok science teacher looped. Maurice Hall solved this equation in 10 seconds. Why are we still asking if he belongs? The comment section blew up, supportive voices outpacing trolls. He smiled to himself. He allowed a moment of satisfaction. It was his first in a while. Then his phone rang.
No caller ID.
He answered cautiously. "Mr. Hall?" a voice asked. "This is Organizing for Return Maurice Network. We're mobilizing a nationwide teach-in across 5,000 schools next week. Are you willing to speak?" Maurice said quietly, "Yes, I will." When he hung up, the number disappeared from his recent calls list. At the same time, in a suburban Texas kitchen, a father scrolled the same video, muttering, "That could have been my son." In a Brooklyn basement, a young woman printed the investigation timeline and taped it to her mirror. Then came the twist. On a Sunday morning talk show, a commentator pointed out a polling shift. "We've seen a 13% jump in young adult approval for institutional reform in campuses nationwide," he said, "because of one man's equation, because of one janitor's stand." The network asked viewers, "Does this change elections?" Within hours, a local midterm race flipped. A candidate who endorsed Maurice's cause edged out an opponent by 2 points on a platform of research equity and prison reform. Analysts mentioned the story dozens of times. Maurice leaned back. He realized the fight wasn't just moral. It was political. It wasn't just academic. It was cultural. The entire structure of power had cracked. By evening, newspapers ran features titled "The Hall Effect," referring to how little changes can create big shifts in systems. Columnists wrote that Maurice might be the catalyst this generation needs. A major tech company CEO tweeted, "Our pipeline's next hire, unfiltered talent, Maurice Hall proof." But not everyone cheered. In corporate boards and donor retreats, whispers grew louder. What if tomorrow someone else like Hall shows up? Emails leaked. Risk exposure. Company brand and human capital bets are being questioned. Some hedge fund executives quietly sold stock in private prison companies. In the halls of Whitendale University, chaos added to the theater. Faculties scheduled emergency meetings. Board members withheld end-of-year reports. The president skipped public appearances, and inside the student union, a poster appeared. "Tuition stops funding prisons." Maurice watched all of it. From his window he could see snow falling lightly. Maybe the first of the season. He traced a droplet sliding down the glass. He thought of nights he spent in prison. No windows, No snow, just metal and echo. He thought of the equation he solved. The one they bet against. The one they feared. He thought of thousands of students now raising their hands in labs and saying, I belong. He and that droplet shared a path downward, quiet, unnoticed, until it left a trace. That night, after his speaking engagement finished and the live stream ended, Maurice returned home exhausted. The apartment was silent, but the walls pulsed with memory. He made tea, sat at the table, opened his laptop to check the logistics for the upcoming teach-in. Then the knock came. Soft, polite. He froze. Something about the timing off kilter. He didn't answer immediately. He listened.
No footstep.
Just the knock. Again. He set the kettle aside. He reached for the door chain, slipped it on. He opened the door a crack.
No one there.
Just a plain envelope lying on the mat. He picked it up with slow precision. It was unmarked. No stamp. No sender. Inside, a single line of printed text on thick cardstock. You were never meant to walk away. His heart knocked. The snow outside had stopped, and in that hush, Maurice realized the fight would get darker before it got clearer. As he turns the envelope over, the inside flap reveals a second message in handwritten ink. See you at midnight. Warehouse 117, Port Authority. Months passed since the courtroom shockwaves. The cold winter turned to early spring. Snow melted, trees budded, birds returned, and something else shifted too. Long-buried systems creaked under daylight, and their hidden seams began to show. For Maurice Hall, the change was more than symbolic. It was real. The lawsuit he filed, the code he uncovered, the voices he lifted, they culminated in a victory that felt improbable even to him. He sat in his new office at Whitendale University, the same institution whose halls once echoed with his footsteps as a janitor. Now a plaque bore his name. Assistant Professor of Computational Justice. He considered it, touched the brass letters lightly, remembered the grin Carson Welling had worn the day he issued his $10,000 bet. That grin belonged to a past Maurice didn't shrink from anymore. The lawsuit had ended quietly in court one afternoon. A sealed agreement, but the release made waves. The Wellings accepted an undisclosed sum, the university committed to a reform fund for incarcerated scholars, and Maurice walked away with both monetary restitution and moral vindication. He donated the bulk of the funds to reform prison education programs, a cause he had nurtured silently while incarcerated. He seeded a foundation, Hall Institute for Incarcerated Minds, offering tech training, scholarship pipelines, and mentorship for Black youth with criminal records, who were often blocked from every door. Walking into a renovated former lab in the basement of Prescott Hall, Maurice paused. The room smelled of new equipment, fresh paint, possibility. He ran his hand along a row of computers donated by alumni who'd pledged support. On the wall was a large mural, a quote he used often now, "Genius grows where it's allowed to." Under it, his students gathered, young Black men and women, some in hoodies, some in designer jackets, all with eyes lit with something new, hope. One student, Kendra, raised her hand. "Professor Hall," she said, voice steady despite her tremble. "You said we're building future systems that don't bury past minds. What does that mean exactly?" Maurice tilted his head slightly, smiling. "It means we don't ignore where we begin. We build from the places the system tried to erase. That gives us foundation that those who were never erased can't imagine." Kendra nodded. The others watched, absorbing. Maurice felt the quiet surge of pride. He had reclaimed his name, built something that extended far beyond it. Meanwhile, outside the university, the Welling empire was unraveling. The news broke one morning. One of the private prison companies the family held shares in announced a major restructuring after investor backlash. More damagingly, board minutes from Welling Defense Systems emerged detailing how the Cascade Predictive Matrix, Maurice's algorithm, had been incorporated into defense contract bidding. Their stock fell. Donors withdrew. Buildings the Welling family had named were quietly renamed by the university's board. Carson Welling, the heir whose arrogance once ruled the lounge, was expelled from Whitendale. His father sold his shares. Mother Evelyn slipped into retirement. The family withdrew from the campus that had once reflected their name in its architecture. It was as though the empire they thought invincible sank beneath its own exposed foundations. Maurice watched not for vindication, but for change. He walked the same marble corridors he once swept, nodded to faculty who now addressed him by title, not as background. He didn't relish the reversal. He understood that what mattered was the future, the next generation. On the day of his first public lecture in that same auditorium where his equation had echoed through whispers, Maurice stood behind the podium. Students filled the hall, more than half from historically excluded backgrounds. Cameras recorded. Dean Halifax sat in the front row, looking smaller than ever. The lecture title, Legacy, Algorithm, Liberation. Maurice began. When I first walked into this building, I didn't belong. My presence was an anomaly. Today you belong because someone else belonged. Because someone wasn't given a chance. He paused, scanning the faces. This system tried to erase me. It succeeded in parts, but what it couldn't erase was my mind. Soft applause rose. He laid out the timeline. The janitor bet, the stolen algorithm, the prison years, the lawsuit, the foundation. He traced the angles of damage, racial profiling, academic theft, incarceration for profit. Then he showed where we go from here. Classrooms where formerly incarcerated students lead research labs. Companies founded on inclusion, not exploitation. Algorithms built for equity, not extraction. An unexpected moment froze the room. At the back row, a young janitor, uniform crisp, shirt tucked in, ID badge hanging low, stood, his eyes wide. He held a piece of paper in his hand, folded. Maurice noted it. He paused the lecture. "Excuse me," he said gently. "You there." The janitor approached the stage slowly. Students stirred. Maurice waited until the young man stood beside him. The janitor cleared his throat. "My name is Derek Monroe," he said. "I've worked here 2 years. I cleaned the labs you once used. I never thought someone like me would get to be in a lecture like this." He handed Maurice the folded paper. "I got accepted to MIT today."
The room erupted. Not in applause, but in hushed astonishment.
Maurice opened the paper. The letter said, "You are hereby admitted to MIT." The surprise twist. The young janitor had been quietly inspired by Maurice's journey. The same halls he had swept were now his classrooms. The same equation that exposed empire became an entrance. Maurice closed the letter carefully. "Welcome," he said. "You belong here." The students cheered. The janitor smiled, tears in his eyes. Maurice stepped back to the podium. He finished the lecture. "Remember," he said, voice firm, "the greatest rebellion is not disruption, it is creation." A thunderous standing ovation followed. Later, in the quiet of his office, Maurice looked at a framed photo on his desk. The janitor turned professor moment. The letter, the foundation logo. He thought of every step. The arrest, the cleaning cart, the whiteboard, the lawsuit, the lecture hall. He thought of change. He thought of systems built on erasure, and systems rebuilt on inclusion. He rose, walked out into the corridor. Carpets muffled his footsteps. The marble walls reflected lights overhead. And ahead of him, the young janitor Derek headed toward his first class in math. Maurice smiled. He had won more than a case. He had won the chance to walk away, and to build a future. But the story didn't end with victory, because every victory spawns a new threshold. And as Maurice paused in front of the door to his office, he noticed a folder slipped under the door. It was sealed. Red wax. The emblem on it, a stylized prisoner's cell merging into code. He picked it up. His heart skipped. He opened it slowly. Inside, a contract. Title: Maurice Hall, Founding Chair, Institute of Computational Justice. Signed by the Board of Trustees. Date: tomorrow. His eyes caught one more line at the bottom, in fine print. Subject to conferral. Acceptance by candidate's own motion. He exhaled. He understood what it meant. The universe had given him more than vindication. It had given him responsibility. And as the doors of the lecture hall swung shut behind him, the corridor fell silent. Maurice walked on. Behind a small side door, the janitor Derek watches Maurice disappear, then checks his own phone. A text flashes. "Your algorithm is ready. Initiate phase 2. No one should have to solve an equation just to prove they're human. No one should be erased for being brilliant in the wrong skin." If Maurice's story shook you, if it made you angry, made you feel, then don't scroll past. Type yes if you believe in justice. Subscribe if this broke your heart.